During the New Year celebrations, Jason suddenly declared that the card game was boring and suggested we play with higher stakes. He threw the keys to his new BMW on the table and asked if we dared to match it. I knew he was just showing off his new car. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and situations are imaginary and created solely for entertainment purposes. We do not encourage or promote gambling, gaming, or reckless behavior. Everyone was surprised, quickly saying we're just playing. For fun, we can't match that. While they praised him for being so impressive at such a young age, I hesitated because I had 3 kings in my hand. Jason enjoyed the flattery, ready to shuffle the cards. When I silently slid my BYD car keys across the table and said, "I'll match," the room fell silent. Everyone looked at me in disbelief, and Jason's eyes widened in surprise. The atmosphere became tense. The moment we both put our keys on the table, any family bond disappeared, but I didn't regret it. After all, he was the one who put his BMW keys down first. If he could play so coldly against family, then I would no longer worry about his feelings. Jason smiled disdainfully and said, "How much money do you have in your pocket to scare me? We're talking about a BMW. Maybe you should think carefully before betting with that BYD." I gave him a cold look. I hated playing cards with him. What should have been a joyful celebration turned bitter because he was bragging about his wealth, raising the stakes every round. Anyone who has played knows that those with less money are at the mercy of those with more. While we were betting $1 or $2, he was betting $500. We all asked him not to play so high among family, but he innocently replied, "Is 500 a lot?" He seemed to enjoy the pace of the game, even though not everyone could keep up. He came to the game just to play with the dignity of less fortunate relatives. Realizing that my BYD couldn't compete with his BMW, I turned to call Emily. We were about to get married, and she was wearing the 3 gold pieces I bought her. I asked her quietly, "Do you think we could use the necklace and bracelet as part of the bet?" Emily looked at me without even asking what cards I had and simply took off the necklace and bracelet, placing them on the table. At that moment, a phrase crossed my mind. With a wife like this, what more could a man desire? I looked seriously at Jason and said, "Do you think this balances the bet? Let's show the cards now." Jason's expression changed. He gritted his teeth, probably not expecting me to challenge him. With a mocking tone, he said, "Little brother, don't say I didn't warn you. I can risk this car without problem, but are you sure it's a good decision for your family?" I shook my head and replied, "It's fine. My family has its own way of getting ahead. Besides, didn't you and Sarah say at dinner that I lack courage?" Jason's face darkened even more. I had never offended him before, but at dinner he belittled me for not earning as much as him, looking down on me for being shy, unlike him who was already a boss. Halfway through his speech, Dad offered him a cigarette and tried to light it for him, but he didn't even shield himself from the wind. City people and girls might not understand it, but in the countryside, when an elder lights a cigarette without the other person covering from the wind, it means disrespect, a public humiliation. Everyone nervously watched Jason, asking if he was going to show his cards. He took a deep breath and suddenly said, "If we're going to play, let's play seriously. That's what excites me." He placed his cards on the table, covered them with a plate, and left. We stayed in the room watching him take a small wooden box from the trunk of his BMW and bring it back, placing it on the table. When he opened the box, it was full of cash. Jason proudly declared, "300,000. Are you in or out?" Our actions had already caught the attention of the elders. The uncle, seeing what Jason was doing, became alarmed and quickly said, "Have you lost your mind? Are you using the New Year advance payment?" Jason sat down with a carefree smile and said, "It's fine, I can afford it. The question is, do you dare to match it?" I immediately understood Jason's plan. In bluff games, there's normally a cap on bets to prevent them from going too high. But when Jason started, he specifically said there would be no cap, wanting to raise the stakes until I couldn't keep up and would lose everything. As expected, he arrogantly told me, "You're not going to back down. Are you? If you don't match, you can't withdraw what you've already bet." The uncle quickly understood Jason's strategy and couldn't help but laugh. Then he went back to playing mahjong with the other elders, not even looking in our direction. I clenched my fists silently because I couldn't raise 300,000 in cash. At that moment, Emily intervened. "It doesn't matter, we can bet our wedding house." In an instant, everyone turned to look at her in disbelief. The uncle, bewildered, dropped his cigarette and forgot about mahjong, while Jason looked at us, not knowing if he was angry or nervous, both trembling slightly. The elders stopped playing and ran toward us, saying it was already too much. Dad was furious, ran toward me, hit my shoulder, and exclaimed, "You've lost your mind! You're going to ruin us!" While he scolded me, he tried to see my cards, but I held them tightly, refusing to show them. Anyone who knows bluff knows you should never show your cards to anyone because their expressions can give you away. I had 3 kings, and only 3 aces could beat me. Jason had started this war, and every experienced player knows that a hand with 3 kings can lead you to bankruptcy or bloodshed. Emily stared at Jason and said, "Our wedding house is worth $500,000. We're raising $200,000 more. Are you going or not?" The uncle shouted angrily, "You've both gone crazy." He leaned over the table trying to withdraw our chips, yelling at me, "Don't provoke your brother, he's a big boss who doesn't want to deal with you. Talk to your brother calmly. Maybe in the future you can help each other." I pushed him away and shouted, "Leave it alone." The uncle was stunned by my reaction, trembling with surprise. I gritted my teeth and said, "When he bet 500? Nobody said a word. When he bragged at dinner, you let Dad light his cigarette. Today he put his keys on the table first, and I'm going to match him to the end." The uncle looked at me open-mouthed and said, "You should speak more respectfully. He's still your older brother." I looked coldly at Jason and said, "Either match these 200,000 and reveal your cards, or lose everything you've already put down. There's a third option. We cancel the whole game. We withdraw our chips, but you apologize to my dad." Everyone in the room fell silent. Everyone had seen Jason hold his cigarette with 2 fingers while Dad lit it for him, but at that moment no one dared to speak. I even noticed that the uncle had an expression of satisfaction. Jason laughed with rage and asked, "Are you really acting like this in front of the family?" I shook my head and replied, "The moment you put your keys on the table, we stopped being family." Jason was silent for a few seconds before smiling sideways and saying, "All right, don't say I didn't warn you. You're the one who wants to match, right?" Suddenly, he lifted his cards and showed me 2 queens. As soon as I saw his cards, I felt great relief, but kept a serious expression. Jason shook his head and said, "Guess if my last card is a trio. Revealing part of your cards is a common tactic to intimidate the opponent and read their reaction." He couldn't scare me. Even if he had a trio, it would still be lower than my 3 kings. I had worried he might have 3 aces, but now it seemed my fears were unfounded. Jason's tactics had backfired on him. They had cornered him. Of course, although I felt calm inside, I still gritted my teeth and said, "I bet you're just trying to scare me. Are you going or not?" Jason stared at me, as if trying to read my thoughts. Bluff is about acting and courage. At that moment, he was lost, and the uncle quickly urged him, "Aren't you going to bet? Don't you see he's not afraid of your cards?" Jason's face twisted with rage and said, "If I don't bet, I lose the BMW and the 300,000. He must be trying to intimidate me." Normally, relatives would intervene with their opinions, but in this situation, no one dared say anything because before the cards are revealed, it's impossible to know what's real or false. Jason nervously scanned the expressions of all the family members. Every bet had been initiated by him. If he backed down now, he could never show himself proudly to the family again. Finally, he called his wife. "Come here." Jessica reluctantly approached the table. Jason told her to bet the 3 gold pieces, since Jessica's were worth much more than Emily's. Unlike Emily, who offered her jewelry willingly, Jessica refused to take them off. At that moment, Jason panicked and quickly showed her his cards. Jessica looked at them and immediately showed enthusiasm. She took off all her gold jewelry and placed it on the table. With a smile, she said to me, "Come on, all or nothing. Don't regret it if you lose. Today, all the family members will be witnesses. Whoever backs down will have bad luck." I asked her, "Are you saying we're going to show our cards?" Jessica responded enthusiastically, "Show them. Let's go all the way with you." Her greed was evident, but everyone else had already run out of chips. Suddenly, she took off her diamond ring and placed it on the table, declaring, "This ring was a great investment." I replied, "I appreciate it, but I wouldn't know how to value it correctly for this type of game." Jessica got upset, pointing her finger at me and scolding me. "What do you know? Do you know what this is?" "It's from Meat and Synthesis. Designer. It's a DR." I forced a smile and said, "Sister-in-law, I don't care what it is. To me, it's only worth $100. Just as she was about to reply, Jason suddenly said, "I'll put my house in play." The room filled with exclamations. The uncle exclaimed, "Don't be reckless. That house is in the city center. It's worth $1,500,000. Jason mocked, "Dad, I'm not being reckless. Whatever I bet, he has to match. According to game rules, each bet must be equal to or greater than the previous one. Little brother, do you have the money to continue?" Jason had his teeth clenched, as if the decision was consuming him from within. He had said he would put his house on the table, but his voice no longer had the same arrogance as before. Jessica was looking at him from behind, still with the jewelry on the table, as if also seeking validation from her husband. I didn't respond immediately. The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My cards remained firm between my fingers. 3 kings. I had beaten him. He knew it. I knew it. Everyone knew it. So, what will it be, Jason? I asked calmly, although my chest was pounding hard. Jason looked at the table, then he looked at me. He slowly stood up, pushing the chair back with a screech that seemed to make several of those present jump. He walked around the table without saying anything, as if searching the floor for some invisible excuse that would save him from that moment. You know what? He said finally. This was a game. It was a way to have fun as a family. We shouldn't take everything so seriously. Who would really bet a house on New Year's? There was an uncomfortable murmur. Jessica looked down. The uncle pretended to check his phone. No one dared look at me directly. Emily, without moving, crossed her hands on her lap. You put down your keys, the cash, and clearly said there would be no limit. Now you want to back down. My voice came out softer than I expected, but firmly. Jason approached me. His breath smelled of whiskey. He put a hand on my shoulder as if that could erase what had happened. You're a good player. Sam, better than I thought. I admit it. But let's not ruin the night, okay? Let's not make this a scandal. I removed his hand without brusqueness. I didn't need to push him. He was already falling on his own. I'm not interested in your house, Jason, I said, looking into his eyes. I didn't come to destroy you. I just played fair. Jessica stood up abruptly. She gathered the jewelry without saying a word and left the room. Jason followed her with his eyes. Then he lowered his head. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something, but he just stood there, motionless, with clenched fists. I withdraw from the game, he said finally. I didn't respond. I stood up, took Emily's hand, and we began to gather our things. As we left, I felt all eyes on my back, some admiring, others resentful, but none as heavy as Jason's. Upon reaching the door, Dad stopped me. His eyes were moist, but his voice was firm. I'm proud of you, son. I nodded without saying anything. Not because I didn't want to, but because for the first time in a long time it wasn't necessary to say more. The aftermath. After that night, time began to flow like a slow and turbid river. The days that followed the game weren't like the previous ones. Instead of family laughter, only cutting silences remained. Half-hearted greetings and hollow phrases in the house hallways. We stayed a few more days at my parents' house because that's how it was planned. But nothing was the same anymore. At meals, Jason barely ate. Jessica spoke only what was necessary. The uncle, who used to make jokes nonstop, now barely lifted his eyes from his plate. Dad kept himself busy with unnecessary tasks, like sweeping the patio twice a day. Mom avoided talking about the game night, as if ignoring it could erase its impact. Emily, for her part, moved with serene elegance. She helped cook, served tea, cleared the plates, but her eyes were always attentive. She knew something was brewing, a tension that no one knew how to release. One day, while we walked alone through the countryside, she said to me, "Do you think Jason hates us?" "I don't know," I replied, "but I know he hates himself, and that's worse." 2 weeks passed. Upon returning home, we decided not to talk about the topic with anyone else. We didn't mention the bet, nor the rumors that began to circulate through family groups. But the echoes reached us anyway. Some said I had been ruthless. Others said Jason had tried to cheat me. The only thing we knew for certain was that the family's respect had been broken. One day, I received a call from my cousin Manuel. We talked about football, work, nonsense. Until he paused. "Sam, I'm going to tell you something because it seems fair to me. It's being said that you cheated with the cards." I stopped dead in my tracks. I was in the kitchen with the glass of water halfway to my mouth. Did Jason say that? Not directly. But someone heard him insinuate that it was very convenient that you just happened to have 3 kings when he raised the bet. And what do you think? I think Jason is afraid and that you won because you know what you're doing. I hung up with a knot in my stomach. Emily looked at me from the living room. There was no need to say anything. She knew. That night I couldn't sleep. I got up and went out to the balcony. The city lights flickered as if breathing. I felt the weight of a bitter victory. I hadn't cheated. I didn't need to. But the price of honesty was isolation, suspicion, distrust. The poison of wounded pride had spread. Dad accompanied me for a moment. He lit a cigarette, as he did when he wanted to think in silence. "You know what I learned over the years?" he said without looking at me. "Sometimes the truth doesn't win. It just resists." I nodded not because I was satisfied, but because I understood. We had resisted and would continue to do so. The days passed like a wound that closes but leaves a visible line, impossible to ignore. We returned home, to our routine, to our bed. Emily carefully hung her gold necklace in the same place where she kept it before that night, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Outside, the streets remained the same. The corner bar, the store with its faded sign, children playing ball at dusk. But inside us, something had clicked. An echo. An internal vibration that didn't go away with silence or with days. It was the echo of Jason's pride crashing against his own reality. The family never mentioned it directly again. Some group messages played distracted. Others feigned normalcy. But in every cold greeting, in every forced smile at family gatherings, there was latent tension. I knew Jason didn't forgive me for exposing him, but what I didn't know, and was about to discover, was that his fall was just beginning. Shocker. The revelation. One afternoon, while Emily was cooking and I was helping fix a lamp in the dining room, we received an unexpected visit. It was Mariana, a mutual friend of Jessica's. She wasn't coming out of courtesy. "I don't want you to misunderstand me," she said, sitting on the edge of the sofa as if afraid to leave a mark. "But I think you should know something." Emily offered her tea. I remained silent. "Jessica called me crying this morning." Jason made a long pause. "He's selling things, big things. The new television, the electric bicycle, even a watch his father had given him." "Why?" Emily asked, although I already intuited the answer. "Because he owes money, and not a little. He has gambling debts. Many. And it's not from now." What happened on New Year's was just the tip of the iceberg. I felt my chest tighten, not from guilt, but from confirmation. Jason hadn't lost from pride. He had lost because he was already lost. "Does Jessica know?" I asked. "Now she does. And she's desperate. She says he locks himself in the bathroom to play online, that he gets up at dawn to watch games in Asia. She can't take it anymore. She's afraid. She says the car he bet no longer belonged to him, that it was repossessed." Emily brought her hand to her mouth. I said nothing. I looked at my hands stained with dust from the broken lamp. I thought about how Jason had tried to give us a lesson in power, when in reality he was just screaming for help. Mariana left shortly after. Emily and I remained in silence. She looked at me with tired eyes. "Are you going to do something?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I don't know if he wants to be helped or if he still thinks he's playing." That night, I reviewed some numbers. Not because I wanted to know how much the BMW he had bet was worth, but because I wanted to understand how far he had fallen. He had sold properties, objects. He had taken loans with unpayable interest. What hurt me most wasn't what he had lost. It was seeing that behind all his facade of greatness, Jason had nothing solid. Only ruins covered with empty speeches. 3 days later, I received a call. It was Jessica. "Sam, can I see you?" The meeting. Jessica arrived the next day, punctual, with an expression I didn't know from her. She dressed simply, a beige blouse and jeans, no makeup, no earrings. Her face, once proud, had become a map of anxiety. Behind her eyes were sleepless nights. Emily received her politely but without softness. There was no resentment in her treatment, just an educated coldness that said, "We haven't forgotten." I prepared coffee in silence while Jessica sat on the edge of the sofa with her hands intertwined, as if praying inside. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. Her voice sounded thinner than the last time I heard it. I nodded. There was no need to feign forced kindness. We knew why she was there. "I didn't come to justify Jason," she said. "I know what he did, what he's been doing. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough to feel shame for not confronting him before." Emily sat beside me. The house was silent, except for the soft tapping of a leak in the kitchen, which I still hadn't fixed. Jessica took a deep breath. After the game, he changed. He didn't shout, didn't get angry, didn't argue. He just kept shutting himself away. He started selling things, hiding bills. I found a debt in his email for more than $40,000, and it wasn't the only one. The amount made me clench my jaw. "And you didn't report him?" I asked without raising my voice. "To whom? To my husband? To my children's father?" She shook her head. "He would hate me forever." "I don't know if he does now." A long silence followed. I could hear the humming of the refrigerator, the echo of a car on the street, a dog barking in the distance. "I want to help him," she said finally, "but I don't know how. And I thought that you, Sam, you achieved what no one else could, making him lower his head." The phrase hit me harder than I expected, not from pride, but from the weight that came behind it. I wasn't his savior. I had just won a hand of cards, nothing more. But perhaps for Jason, it had been enough to ignite a spark. I'm not going to force him, I replied. If he wants help, he has to ask for it. No one is saved by being dragged. Jessica nodded with tears in her eyes. Just if someday he asks you, don't reject him. I offered her a tissue. She accepted it and left shortly after. Emily and I remained in the living room, looking at the empty sofa. Would you do it? Emily asked. Would you help him? I don't know, I admitted, but I couldn't sleep if I didn't try. Right, Jay. A new beginning. Weeks passed. During that time, Emily and I resumed a project we had postponed for years. Opening our own small cafe and homemade food place. Nothing big. Just a simple corner in the neighborhood where I grew up, where neighbors still greeted by name, and doors were left half open out of habit. We got up early, cooked together, designed a simple but honest menu. Emily baked with a skill inherited from her grandmother. I took care of the coffee, orders, and putting soul into the place. We called it Roots because that's exactly what it was. A return to the essential. It wasn't easy. We didn't have big capital. We used what we had saved for the honeymoon. We didn't resort to what Jason had bet. Not a cent. Not from pride, but from conviction. And it was in the middle of that new life, of that shared effort, that one afternoon, while we were closing the place, I heard a voice behind me. Sam? I turned around. It was Jason. He had lost weight. His shirt was wrinkled, his shoes worn. But the most striking thing wasn't his appearance. It was his gaze. For the first time in years, there was no arrogance or rage, only emptiness. Can we talk? He asked. I let him in. Emily greeted him with a brief gesture and withdrew to the back. We sat at one of the tables by the window. The street outside had the golden glow of sunset. I'm not coming to justify myself, he began. I'm coming to ask you for something. Not money, not compassion, just time. I listened to him. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't accuse him. I just let him talk. And he spoke of the debts, of sleepless nights, of shame, of his fear, of how he had wanted to beat me to prove to Dad that he was worth something, of how the game got out of his hands, of how he almost lost Jessica, his children, himself. When he finished, he was crying. I didn't move. I don't want to live like this, he said. And I can't do it alone. I passed him a glass of water. Are you willing to give up? To lose? And I, without hesitation. Because I don't want to carry it anymore. And because you're going to know what to do with that better than me. I nodded. It wasn't a deal. It wasn't a victory. It was the first step of a long journey. That night, Emily and I had dinner in silence. She took my hand under the table. She said nothing. It wasn't necessary. Somewhere in the city, Jason was sleeping. Perhaps for the first time in a long time. Money, the papers, and the debts. I had never liked talking about money. I was raised in a house where effort was worth more than salary, and where saving wasn't a strategy, but a necessity. But in those days, I found myself forced to look money in the face, not as a symbol of power, but as a silent witness to everything that can break. After the conversation with Jason, I began receiving documents, deeds, transfer receipts, a disorganized list of things he had bet or committed over the years. Some weren't even his. There were things in Jessica's name, things shared with his father, things he didn't even remember having offered as collateral. His life was written on stained papers, many of them with red stamps of overdue or under review. Emily helped me organize everything. We spent hours reviewing folders, scanning documents, noting dates. We weren't doing it with the intention of keeping anything. We were doing it to understand how far he had fallen, because Jason wasn't giving us an inheritance. He was handing us the remains of a shipwreck. One afternoon, Jessica returned to our house. She was calmer than the previous time. She sat at the table with a notebook in her hand and a different determination in her gaze. There's something I didn't tell you, she began. Something that embarrasses me. Emily encouraged her with a gesture. I simply waited. For a long time, I knew Jason had problems with gambling. I knew it from before we got married. But I thought it was a phase, that he would leave it, that with time he would change. Many people think that, I replied honestly. Almost everyone who loves someone who is trapped. Jessica looked down. When he started losing large amounts, he hid it from me. I saw how things disappeared, how suddenly there were more credit cards, more calls he didn't want to answer. There came a time when he mortgaged the house, but he lied to me. He said it was for an investment. I signed, without reading. Emily tensed beside me. The house he said he bet was already mortgaged. Jessica nodded. Yes, and not only that. I discovered that one of the jewels I wore that night, The white gold necklace wasn't real. It was a replica, a copy that Jason had made when he sold the original. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because of the lie itself, but because of what it revealed. Jason had lived in a theater of appearances, a stage built with empty objects, broken promises, and forced silences. "Did you know?" Emily asked with a softer tone. "No, I found out later when I looked for the papers to see what was left. It made me so angry. I felt part of the deception." A heavy silence fell. Jessica raised her gaze. "I know Jason is trying to change, but the debt is enormous, and there are still things in my name that are at risk. I'm not coming to ask you to pay for him. I just need your help to put everything in order, so we don't lose the little we have left." I looked at her, not as a sister-in-law or as someone who once treated me with disdain. I looked at her as an exhausted person who had finally dropped her defenses. "We're going to help you," I said, "but with conditions." Jessica tensed. "What conditions?" "Jason has to continue his treatment. No excuses, no escapes. And you have to be willing to rebuild, not to sustain ruins. This isn't a rescue, it's a restart." Jessica nodded with contained tears. "Thank you." "Really?" After she left, Emily hugged me. She said nothing. Her silences had always been more powerful than any speech. That night, while I was closing the place, I thought about how ironic it all was. Jason's bet had been the spark, but the real fire wasn't caused by the game, but by everything he had been hiding from before. Money wasn't the enemy. The enemy was fear. Of falling, of not being worth anything, of losing control. And in that war, Jason had been alone for too long, but not anymore. The sabotage. Sometimes people take years to show who they really are. Other times it's enough for everything to crumble, for masks to fall like dry leaves. That's what happened with Jason. After the last conversation with Jessica, everything started moving faster than I expected. She fulfilled her part. She confronted him. She told him he couldn't continue like this, that the game wasn't an escape, that the family wasn't going to support him eternally. And surprisingly, Jason didn't explode, didn't insult her, didn't flee. He just broke down. His pride, that shell that had wrapped him for years, cracked like fine glass. One afternoon, I accompanied him to his first appointment at the rehabilitation clinic. Not as his younger brother, not as his gambling rival, but as someone who at the end of the day couldn't bear to see the family sink. The center was on the outskirts of the city, an old building painted white with neat gardens and an uncomfortable silence that could be breathed in the air. There were no grandiose signs or promises of miracles, just a modest sign that said, "Comprehensive Support Center." On the way, Jason barely spoke. He carried a small backpack, worn jeans and a t-shirt that hung from his shoulders as if he had shrunk inside it. His face was pale with marked dark circles, half-grown beard. He was no longer the man who strutted at family parties. He was a broken, fragile, real guy. "Thank you for coming," he murmured, without looking at me directly. "It's not for you," I replied. "It's for everyone, including you." He nodded, swallowing hard. Inside, a nurse received him professionally. She reviewed his data, explained the process. I stayed in the waiting room, observing the faces of others who were there, anguished wives, worried mothers, men and women who came by their own will or dragged by fear. I saw reflections of Jessica, of my father, of myself. An hour later, Jason came out. He didn't look relieved, but neither defeated. "It's a process," he said. "It's not magical, they don't promise cures." "Life isn't either," I replied. We walked in silence to the car. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to him. There was no competition, just two men who knew that poorly handled pride destroys. Days later, Jessica called me. She wanted to show me some documents she had found at home. She didn't want to do it alone. I went with Emily. Upon arriving, Jessica was sitting in the dining room with disorganized folders and a tense expression. "I found this in a drawer," she said, pointing to the papers. "I didn't know they existed. Their accounts, bank movements, loans, mortgages." Jason hid more than I thought. I reviewed everything patiently. Some documents chilled my blood. Jason hadn't only mortgaged the house. He had tried to sell shares of the family business. He had forged a signature on a loan. Does Dad know this? And I don't want him to know like this. If he finds out suddenly, it could be worse. Emily, who was reviewing other papers, looked up. "Here it says that part of those assets are no longer recoverable," she pointed out. "He lost them." Jessica nodded with contained tears. "That's why I'm showing everything. I don't want more secrets. I don't want more masks." I sat down, exhaling deeply. The truth was worse than I imagined, but it was also liberating. No more facades, no more poses, just naked facts, without filters. We're going to fix this, I said, looking at them. But we need time and sincerity. There's no more room for lies. Jessica nodded, relieved. That night, when we returned home, Emily hugged me at the door. Do you hate him? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted, but not for what he did to me, but for what he did to himself. Emily looked at me, caressing my face. You're different, she whispered. I kissed her, knowing she was right, because pride can destroy, but it can also rebuild if one decides to let it go in time. The crossfire. I always believed that enemies could be seen coming, that they carried an invisible sign, a gesture, a look, but I was wrong. Sometimes bullets come from those you least expect, and crossfire doesn't distinguish guilty from innocent. 2 months had passed since Jason entered rehabilitation. The process wasn't linear. Some days he seemed strong, committed. Others he fell apart. Jessica remained firm, and I was torn between distrust and hope. But beyond the personal, life continued, and with it our small place. Roots was growing. The neighbors supported us, the coffee was good, and Emily, with her warmth and her magical hands for baking, had managed to make people not only come to eat, but to stay, to talk. For the first time in a long time, I felt we were building something that truly belonged to us, until everything started falling apart. One morning, while we were preparing orders, 2 municipal inspectors arrived without warning. They reviewed everything: documents, permits, the kitchen, emergency exits. Emily and I looked at each other, surprised but calm. We had everything in order. There's a complaint, said one of the inspectors, showing a paper. A complaint? I asked, confused. Why? Who? The man didn't respond. They reviewed meticulously, found a supposed error in the ventilation, and without giving us time to discuss, placed a sign on the door, closed until further notice. Emily paled. I felt the blood boiling in my veins. Hours later, while we tried to understand what had happened, I received a call from Manuel, my cousin. Sam, I have to tell you something. One of Jason's employees, that guy Ramiro, set you up. Ramiro? I asked, frowning. Yes. He filed the anonymous complaint, and it wasn't just because. It was a direct order from Jason. I remained silent, feeling a bitter taste in my throat. Are you sure? I heard him. He said it drunk at the paddle club. He bragged that he could still make your life impossible, even though he was now in rehabilitation. I sat down, rubbing my face. It wasn't just a nasty joke. It was sabotage. That night, after an exhausting day of paperwork and frustrations, Jason appeared at the house door. He was pale with dark circles, but his expression wasn't one of arrogance. It was one of defeat. I haven't come to apologize, he said as soon as I opened the door. I've come to tell you the truth. I let him in. Emily looked at him with suspicion, but said nothing. Ramiro acted because of my fault, Jason admitted. Months ago, when everything was bad, I told him that if he could ever screw you over, he should do it. It was my pride talking, my hatred. He did it. But I didn't know until today. Jessica told me. I sat down looking into his eyes. And what do you plan to do? Jason lowered his head. I'm ashamed. I'm at rock bottom, Sam. I have no excuses. I just want to fix what's left. I sighed. The fatigue showed in my voice. Start by firing Ramiro and by never hiding behind others again. He nodded with moist eyes. That night, while we were closing the door, Emily hugged me from behind. Do you still believe that people don't change? She whispered. I remained silent. I had no answer. I only knew that the crossfire was still burning, but that for the first time, perhaps, we were starting to put it out. The silent victory. I always thought victories were loud, that they were celebrated with applause, with speeches, with fireworks, but I was wrong. Sometimes the true victory comes in silence, subtle, almost invisible. And when you realize it, it's already there, taking root deep down. Weeks passed since the closure of the place hit us hard, not only economically, but in pride. Emily and I had worked too hard to let it fall because of a dirty play, but we didn't give up. While Jason fired Ramiro and cut his ties with the past, we cleaned, painted, fixed every corner of Roots. We couldn't serve the public, but the place remained alive. It was ours, and we weren't going to abandon it. The neighborhood supported us. Neighbors passed by, asked, offered help. My father came one day without saying much with his toolbox. He helped me repair the ventilation system, reinforce the windows. Family isn't always in the good moments, he said while adjusting a screw, but those who are worth it appear when everything is broken. I looked at him in silence, grateful. Jason, for his part, continued in treatment. It wasn't easy. There were relapses, gray days, uncomfortable silences. But something in his gaze had changed. He was no longer the arrogant and empty man from before. He was broken, yes, but he was rebuilding himself in his own way, at his own pace. One afternoon, we received a letter without a sender. Inside was an envelope with money, not much, but enough to pay part of the debts accumulated by the closure. At first, I thought about rejecting it, but when I opened the envelope, I recognized the handwriting. It was from Jason. "This doesn't fix the past," the note said, "but I want to contribute, even if in silence." I discussed it with Emily. She read it, thoughtful. "It's not the money," she said. "It's his way of saying he's changing, even though he doesn't know how to say it in person." We decided to accept the gesture, not out of necessity, but because we understood what it meant. We reopened the place weeks later, without noise, without big announcements, just a modest sign, and the aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread. People returned, neighbors, friends, even some who had looked at us with suspicion before. Little by little, roots started breathing again. And in the background, between table and table, between order and order, Jason appeared one day. Not as a customer, not as a fallen brother, but as a man in process. He sat at a table apart, ordered a coffee, and said nothing. I served him without reproaches, without speeches, just a gesture, a steaming cup, and brief eye contact. That was our true reconciliation. Without words, without masks, just the rebirth of the silent ones, those who fall, those who rise, those who don't need applause to know they're coming back to life, the words that heal. They said that words could heal or destroy, that a simple paper written with the truth could weigh more than any scream. I never believed much in that. Until that night when Dad decided it was time to reunite the family, after months of silences, of distances, of uncomfortable gestures, he wanted to bring everyone together under the same roof again. Not to fight, not for reproaches, but to close wounds, or at least to try to do so. Emily and I arrived early. My parents' old house remained the same. The worn paint on the walls, the gate that creaked, the familiar aroma of stew floating from the kitchen. I felt like a child again, crossing that threshold with my hands in my pockets and my head full of doubts. The first to arrive were my uncles, then cousins, close friends. Some greeted me with warmth, others with that typical caution of someone who doesn't know if you're the hero or the villain in the family story. Jessica arrived alone. She looked better, firmer, more in control of herself. She greeted me with a slight nod and sat in a corner, away from inquisitive looks. And then Jason arrived. I never thought I would see him like this. He wasn't the same man who bet cars and houses to inflate his ego, nor the one who organized humiliations disguised as games. He was someone else, thinner, with somewhat pale skin. But the eyes had a new serenity. There was no longer rage, just an honest fatigue, a dignified surrender. Dad looked at him in silence. Then he gently tapped the table, asking for attention. "I want you to listen to something," he said, "but not from my mouth." Jason handed him an envelope. "You have the floor." Jason froze for a second. He took the envelope. He opened it, took out a folded sheet, and raised it with trembling hands. He took a deep breath and began to read. His voice at first was low, broken, but as he progressed, it became firm. Each word a demolished brick, a falling mask. For years, I believed that money made me better, that gambling was a way to prove who I am. I was wrong. I not only destroyed myself, I almost destroyed my family, my wife, my children, my brother, and everyone who trusted me. He paused. Jessica's eyes shone with tears. Today, I don't come to ask for forgiveness in words. I come to ask for it with facts. I'm in treatment. I'm rebuilding what little I have left. And while I lost a lot, I still want to recover something. Respect. I don't expect you to believe me. Just give me the opportunity to prove it. The silence in the room was absolute. Only the contained breathing of those present could be heard. Sam looked up at me. "I failed you as a brother, and it hurts me more than everything I lost. Thank you for not turning your back on me when I most deserved it. Thank you to you and Emily, and to Jessica, who endured more than she should have." Folding the letter, he left it on the table. His hands continued trembling, but his eyes didn't. "That's all," he said. Dad, who rarely showed emotion, stood up. He walked toward Jason and, without saying a single word, hugged him. It was an awkward, brief hug, but loaded with everything that words couldn't fill. Someone applauded in a corner, then another, and without realizing it, the entire room burst into applause. Not for perfection, but for courage, for the fall, and for the will to get up. Emily took my hand. I squeezed it, feeling how the weight of the months was loosening. Finally, Jason looked at me, not with defiance, but with gratitude. And I knew that perhaps this time, words were indeed healing. Tomorrow, 1 year later, 1 year, 12 months, 52 weeks. And yet, it seemed like a lifetime had passed since that night when everything broke. Emily and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner for the family. This time there would be no cards, no bets, no games with hidden agendas. Just food, laughter, and if luck was on our side, a little peace. The house smelled of freshly baked bread and spices. The new tablecloth covered the table, the glasses shone, and the soft lights filled the room with a warmth that went beyond the physical. "Nervous?" Emily asked, serving the wine. "A little," I admitted. "I suppose it's inevitable." She smiled, caressing my cheek. "You have nothing to prove, Sam. You already did everything." I nodded, not quite believing it, but grateful for her words. The first to arrive were my parents. Dad, more relaxed, with his usual cigarette unlit between his fingers, and Mom organizing plates as if it were her own house. Then the uncles, cousins, familiar faces, all different, older perhaps, wiser. Jessica arrived with the children. She looked peaceful, firmer, more in control of her destiny. She hugged me briefly with a whispered, "Thank you," that said more than 1,000 words. And finally, Jason. He wasn't wearing a suit or expensive watches or that air of superiority that used to accompany him like cheap perfume. He dressed simply. Jeans, rolled-up shirt, short hair, neat beard. But what impacted me most was his gaze. Clean, clear, without masks. "May I come in?" he asked, barely smiling. "Of course," I replied. The night passed between conversations, anecdotes, and toasts. Nothing that had previously divided us floated in the air. Only the fragments remained that we had decided together to glue little by little. Near midnight, Jason approached me. In his hand, he carried an envelope. "It's for you," he said. I opened it. Inside was the money from that forgotten bet. New bills, counted, exactly the same amount that had been on the table that night of pride and madness. "It's not necessary," I told him. "For me it is," he replied. "I don't want to owe you anything. I want to start clean." I remained silent, feeling the weight of the envelope in my hands. It wasn't money, it was dignity. It was his way of closing a cycle, of proving that this time he wasn't running away. I patted his shoulder. "We're even," I said. Fireworks exploded in the sky. Everyone went out to the garden, watching the lights. Emily hugged me from behind, resting her head on my shoulder. "Do you see?" she whispered. "A new year, clean hands, everything in its place." I looked around, the family, the laughter, Jason standing holding his children, Jessica smiling peacefully. And I knew that, although the scars were still there, the weight was no longer the same. We had bet everything, and somehow we had won what really mattered.